Bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de Humanidades al Día. Soy Gonzalo Vich, estudiante de la carrera de Filosofía, y hoy día vamos a hablar con el profesor Jakob Blumenfeld, especialista en la obra de Marx y Stirner. Estamos hoy día con el profesor Jakob Blumenfeld de la Universidad de Oldenburg en Alemania. Voy a hacerle unas preguntas. Muchos estudiantes de filosofía no conocen a Marx y Stirner, que es de quien haces tus investigaciones. Si tuvieras que presentarlo, ¿cuáles serían las primeras palabras que dirías sobre él? Much philosophy students doesn't read Stirner or doesn't know about him. What are the first words you would say about Stirner if you had to introduce him briefly?
Stirner is a wild thinker. He's unrestrained. He's, I would say, one of the first ruthless critics of modern society. He doesn't hold anything back. He criticizes all our sacred dogmas, our sacred foundations, our sacred ideas. He's one of the first critics of alienation, I would say. He's an important 19th century thinker, important for Marx, important for Nietzsche, important for 19th century German philosophy. He's a very funny thinker who uses jokes and comedy and insults to try to ridicule some of our most cherished ideals as ideals that do not really speak to our own interests and our own needs. So I would say to anyone who wants to read Stirner to just go ahead, dive in. It's quite an experience that has been very influential and challenging to many people as kind of a wake-up call, sometimes for their own lives or for collective movements as well.
Bien, muchos o de los pocos que leen a Stirner lo leen para entender a Marx, y confieso que este es mi caso. ¿Por qué habría que leer a Stirner independientemente del valor que tenga para un lector de Marx? Many read Stirner to understand Marx, and I confess that is my case. I ask you, why read Stirner regardless its value to a reader of Marx?
Yeah, many people only read Stirner through the lens of Marx and his critiques, but I think that's a one-sided and limited perspective. Stirner is a very rich thinker on his own. He's part of the young Hegelian school, but almost maybe the last young Hegelian, the one who takes Hegel's ideas to their absolute limit and rejects it at the end of the day. Stirner's critiques of morality and law were very important later for Nietzsche as well. But just on his own terms, I think Stirner really does develop some of the first ideas of what does it mean to be alienated? What does it mean to be alienated from our own conditions, right? From our own sense of self. Stirner really developed this in the 1840s into a theory of the subject and the self, and he did it through a conception of the unique. And all of this was before Marx. Marx systematized and developed and criticized Stirner in interesting ways, but to take seriously Stirner's critique of alienation and dogmatism, there's a lot there to understand our own conditions today, the ideas and the identities that we tend to live up to, that tend to dominate us. I think Stirner gives us I would say a first-person perspective on the categories that tend to shape our lives and how to confront them. And that you can't find in Marx or anywhere else, right? Marx is a social thinker, critical thinker, but Stirner really starts from the perspective of I, myself. And I think that's a fascinating kind of phenomenological perspective to begin with, almost.
¿Podrías desarrollar esta última idea que has dicho? Es decir, de que Stirner desarrolla una dimensión individual de la alienación. Could you please profundizar, develop this last idea that you said, that Stirner values or develops the individual dimension of alienation that could be absent in probably in Marx's first thinking?
Yeah, so Stirner takes seriously the idea that that we are individuals, that we are selves first, and that our collective identities, our collective relationships that determine us, that shape us, that these have value to us only insofar as we take them on, only insofar as we value them as good for ourselves. Stirner thinks that what it means to be a subject, to be an I, to be an ego, is ultimately to determine for ourselves the identities, the categories, and the relationships that we are put into. Now, this is a very hard thing to do, right? Because we don't all have the power to determine the relations that shape us, the categories that we define ourselves, the identities that we have. But it's also, I think, indispensable, or it's necessary to never let go of this perspective on alienation, that ultimately it's about how an individual relates to their surroundings and their environment. With Marx, the categories or the ways in which individuals are alienated is determined by their social relations and their social structures. And Marx is not really concerned about the first person perspective, right? He's not doing a phenomenology. He's doing a social critical theory. Stirner makes clear that a first person perspective on how individuals relate to themselves, to others, and their needs to be a core part of any social critical theory. And I think Marx kind of slowly takes this idea on later in his life, that we need to start from where individuals are themselves. As Marx says in the German ideology, we need to begin with real people, with real human beings we start from, not ideas of human beings, but from real human beings. And I think that's something we should not forget in our critiques.
Una última pregunta, ya que estamos a final de año. ¿Qué le dirías al estudiante que quiere leer a Stirner durante sus vacaciones de verano? And since we are at the end of the year, what would you say to the student who wants to read Stirner during his summer vacation?
It's a great beach read, you know? It's a fun thing to read at the beach. Go for it. So I would recommend first reading my own book on Stirner, of course, called All Things Are Nothing to Me. I wrote this book in 2018, and it's a way of reading Stirner freshly with new eyes and seeing him not in relationship only to Marx, but also in relationship to Foucault, to Levinas, to Heidegger, to Adorno, to Guy Debord, or to other thinkers today. So that it's possible to read Stirner as a philosopher like any other philosophers and to see what his ideas would say to these other thinkers. I think that's very important. His main book is called The Unique and Its Property, Lo Único es Propiedades. That's an easy book to take and read. He wrote another book called Stirner's Critics, which is also very useful and helpful for clearing up some misconceptions of his ideas. So those two texts, and my own book, of course, would make a fantastic beach reading.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Jacob. Ha sido un placer. Gracias a ustedes por estar hasta aquí. Terminamos ahora con esta entrevista. Gracias.